Welcome to our listeners. Today we have another guest with us, Ali Kelly. Ali is the CEO and founder of Mind Blank. As a child and teen, Ali served as a carer for her mother, who was often in suicidal distress. This experience led her to become a mental health advocate, and she has dedicated herself to social justice. Throughout her career, Ali has worked with marginalized communities, the homeless, those afflicted by substance abuse, and individuals needing mental health support. She's professionally a trained singer, so we might have a bit of sing-song today if Ali is feeling in the mood. Ali married her love of the creative arts with a desire to provide early intervention opportunities to young people, resulting in the establishment of Mind Blank in 2011. Mind Blank's unique approach teaching prevention and early intervention skills using interactive forum theatre has impacted over 50,000 people across Australia. Ali has won several awards, notably the Mental Health Matters Award for Mental Health Promotion, the Mental Health Services Award for Mental Illness Prevention, and the Suicide Prevention Australia Life Award for Outstanding Contribution in Queensland. Ali has a Bachelor of Creative Arts, Performance Psychology from, Ali has a Bachelor of Creative Arts, Performance Psychology from University of Wollongong, a Master of Arts in Social Justice, Social Inequality, and Humanitarian Affairs from Griffith University, and a higher degree research in program evaluation, also from the Griffith University. So a range of degrees to back up the work that she does. So really delighted to have you, Ali. Welcome to the Protect Suicide Prevention podcast.
Thank you. What a privilege to be here tonight.
So Ali, we have just finished, at least on the day of the recording, just finishing Australia's first Loneliness Awareness Week. And we had Stan Steindl, a compassion-focused therapist, in the previous episode as a guest, and we were discussing the stark numbers of 1 in 3 Australians feeling lonely on a day-to-day basis, and 1 in 6 struggling with severe loneliness, 1 in 4 actually persistent loneliness. 41% of people aged between 18 to 25 struggling with loneliness. With the cost of living problems, we've also seen that people who are struggling with financial difficulties are 7 times more likely to be lonely. And that just puts into context the work that you and your colleagues at Mind Blank are doing in terms of building resilience and helping people providing them with a language around mental health. I'm curious about a number of things, but can we first start with the name, Mind Blank? What is the origin of the name, or what does it actually mean, Mind Blank?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for sharing the context in terms of the statistics that we're hearing in community here today. Mind Blank, I actually have 2 answers for you. The first answer is when you are completely overwhelmed. Have you ever noticed, like, for example, you have to stand up in front of an audience and give a speech, but you're overwhelmed and you just have a moment of a mind blank. So too much is going on and therefore your brain just goes, what? And you forget that speech that you've practiced time and time and time again. That is one way to interpret mind blank, is we've got too much going on in our brain, too many thoughts, and it forces this recharge. The other concept of mind blank is the opposite analogy, because the Zen mind is a quiet mind. And if we are mindful, we have an empty mind, and therefore we want to clear our mind and become a blank mind.
Interesting. The Zen mind is a quiet mind. And I remember from the last episode, Stan was saying, quoting another colleague from the UK, who's also a compassion-focused therapist, that the calm mind thinks differently compared to, and I think I saw a cartoon somewhere of a man walking with his dog, and the man's thought bubble is just full of all these things that they're thinking of, like a huge number of things. And the dog's thought bubble is very simple, like just one thought in there, like just appreciating nature, just enjoying the walk. It would much rather be in a state of that kind of mind blank. But of course, and there is that opposite that is kind of also explained that. So the space in which your organization works, is it that bit around how do you go from one kind of mind blank to the other kind of mind blank? Is that the transition that you're helping with?
I like that analogy or that thought process. To me, I would say whichever version you relate to would go with that one. But in your communications already, you've understood a little bit about the concept of mind blank is resilience. And I know some people actually don't like the term resilience, but you can interpret resilience as being that calm dog that has nothing in terms of a thought process because they're calm. You can find a way to have a space in your mindset where there could be chaos outside of you, but you've got this calm in amongst it. I appreciate the loneliness statistics that you shared, and often when I present, I will reiterate the youth suicide statistics. And I know in Australia, we're in a state right now where the suicide statistics have gone up, but we do currently have the number one leading cause of death for young people as suicide. We have statistics that show that the kids that live in the country can have up to 60% more risk than their peers in the cities. And part of that is lack of services, increased stigma. There's a whole heap of reasons that statistic increases. And from what I understand, there are some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities where the children, due to what they're exposed to, can experience up to 8 times higher suicide statistic rates than their non-Indigenous peers. So I know you've mentioned a little bit of a description of what we do with Mind Blank, but we are certainly allies in suicide prevention. And part of that is this psychosocial education. The mental health space and the suicide prevention space can work hand in hand. And the more we can skill up community to have skills to know what to do in a time of need, the more we can work on preventative and proactive actions, the hopefully less we will see some of that crisis response.
And in a way, kind of in your brochures, I've seen it comes out very loud and clear around prevention being the first step on that journey. Prevention is much better than cure in that sense. So, Ali, tell me about, are you okay sharing a little bit of your own journey, your own personal story, and insights that you might have had along the way in your role as a young carer?
Yeah, not a problem at all. That's where my why starts. A lot of people will ask, why mental health? I've spent the last 13 years championing the Mind Blank organization in this prevention space. My journey of mental illness in the family, my first memory, age 6. That's the first moment I remember being a carer. And the language I have now is describing suicide ideation. I remember my mother in her room, black, pitch black, no lights are on. She's got her blanket over her, not uttering one positive thing to say. And I remember my family's response. My father was, "Don't worry, she'll get over it," because he's seen these depressive cycles before. And I remember I actually have an older brother. So if I was 6, he would have been about 10. And he just found a way to be able to disconnect from it and go into the other room and play computer games. And for me, I didn't know what else to do, but I have vivid memories of crawling into bed and just crying with her. And that's where my empathy started. In later years, I now understand that that's a caring role. Yeah, I became an emotional carer on top of everything else you juggle in life. But they do say the apple doesn't fall far from a tree sometimes. So in my own journey, I'm a survivor of PTSD. So I too have been challenged with some mental health problems. I'm one of the lucky ones where there was someone that intervened. And I remember that stage of my life, all it took was when the PTSD manifested, one person intervened, handing me the crisis, what was it? It was a business card of the crisis counsellor. And I was told, go to the GP, to get that mental health plan. So that moment was a bit of a circuit breaker because I was the first member of my family to get help, and that journey of going through the mental health system, the sector, it really opened my eyes to see there are a lot of gaps in the system. Even that getting help pathway, the GP that I saw, I remember being a 20-something-year-old telling him I need to go on a mental health plan. And this fella, I didn't have anything in common with him. He's a 60-plus-year-old fella that he listened to me, but he was very, very awkward and didn't quite know what to say or how to respond. I then noticed I'm put on a 6-week waiting list, and you're just not told what to do next or what to do in the meantime. All those experiences, though, have helped me to understand there's definitely some gaps in the system. There's definitely ways that we can improve and work together more in community. So some of those experiences seeded my passion to want to make a difference in community. And that's where the Mind Blank mission kind of stemmed from. Like, my vision, imagine that world if everyone had the skills to know what to do in a time of need. And I'm not just talking clinical therapy skills. I'm talking in community, understanding how to hold space for people, understanding if and when intervention is needed, and that intervention can look different for different people. And there's a bunch of community-based service delivery or suite of different avenues to help build our well-being that's not just the classic go to the clinical counsellor pathway. However, I do understand that there is a space for the clinical psychology, and I was very fortunate to have gotten support when I did, which has stemmed everything that we do today. Even my story today with the mental health journey, it's not like it disappears overnight. In my caring role now, I'm very fortunate that I still have my mother here with us. But in this older adult phase, her mental health is now turning into psychoses. And unfortunately, it's not going away. So it brings our entire family unit into the next phase of how can we skill up? How can we create safety and make sure, our quality of life is still the best version of what it can be, given we all have different things that we're juggling.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ali, for sharing your story. Would it be okay to go back to that 6-year-old Ali that you mentioned, kind of crying with your mom? So looking back, like in suicide prevention, we talk about this concept called empathy in action, which is a combination of cognitive empathy. So your thoughts in my mind, like I've got a sense of how you're thinking. Emotional empathy, your pain in my heart. I feel your pain that you are going through, and empathic concern, your genuine desire to do something about your loved one's pain, or if you are in a helping profession, whoever you are helping, their pain, your genuine desire. Now, I kind of get this thing that you got the emotional empathy bit. As a 6-year-old, you're connected to your mother, you felt the pain, and with your mother, you cried and you walked with your mother. What would today's Ali Kelly tell that 6-year-old Ali Kelly with the benefit of hindsight? You know, like, what would you have shared with that young Ali Kelly who clearly had emotional empathy? What might you have shared with her with the knowledge of hindsight? And I don't know whether a 6-year-old has the capacity to get cognitive empathy, because, you know, are you really able to get what your mother is thinking? Or was it more a feeling state that kind of came across? Your mother may be saying lots of negative things, but are you able to make sense of what she's saying? I don't know. I have not been in those shoes. What would you share with that 6-year-old Ali Kelly today, or in the work that you have done with children who have ended up in a caring role very early in life, which they did not ask for, but they ended up in that kind of role? What would you share with them?
Yeah, I think, great question, by the way. I've never been asked that before. I think the wisdom that I have now, I would probably tell that younger version of myself that it's okay for you to get the help you need. When there's someone in a deep state of depression, sometimes their needs are bigger than what you can carry. And I don't think I would have known that at such a young age, because you can give so much of yourself and just fall into that bottomless pit as well if you're not careful. So the younger version of me probably didn't know that. The older version of me now, I have intervened multiple times with suicidality, and not just within my family, within the sector, within the work that I do. The amount of times I've called for intervention or needed emergency services, etc. And what I've found commonly happens with suicide ideation is actually people need to be heard. You know, and if you can create that safe space, that's the starting point. But you need to be in a state where you have the emotional capacity. So if you're depleted, you're not your best self, and you're putting yourself in a situation where you're intervening with big needs, that's putting yourself last, if that makes sense. So the smarts of what I would do now is tell that young child how it's not your responsibility to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, that there's other adults that are around you that are allies that could help. That's what I didn't know then that I would tell a young person now, is I think when you're young, you just accept life as life has given it. And you don't know. I didn't know as a young carer. Interestingly, even now, and I'm in my mid-30s now, only recently when psychosis has manifested was the first time I'm reaching out carers services. It feels a bit strange because I've been an advocate and champion in the mental health sector for over 13 years now. And it's interesting, even working in the sector, the sector's changing so much that it's even hard for us working in the sector to know what supports are available out there. And there's such value in the lived experience that if you know someone who's tapped into a carer support service, then you can tell that story of what a carer support service does, you know? So even though I've been, you know, an ally, championing the cause, and my story's been out there for many years now, just no one in my network had thought to ask, you know, are you aware that there are services to help support carers? So No, I wasn't. I am now, and I certainly do back them and advocate it if and when I can.
So you would have said to this young Ali, yes, you're in this emotional storm, but it's not your responsibility to create the shelter. That's the responsibility of adults, not the 6-year-old. How do you think this young 6-year-old Ali would have responded to that kind of message? But we are speculating.
I think the message is more, you're not alone in this. So yes, there are other adults, but it is still a direct experience with a loved one. So I wouldn't change it for the world. In terms of my relationship with my mum, still to this day is incredibly close. And the journey that she has experienced has created the empathy, the wisdom that I have now. And that story has impacted me enough to now touch the stories of so many children, young people, and community members across Australia. So how can I complain with such a gift, I do find our stories, without disclosing too much, I find our stories overlap sector space because, how do I say it? We're talking about suicide ideation that manifested, which sometimes manifests due to mental illnesses that may be undiagnosed. But in her circumstance, her mental illnesses manifested due to growing up in poverty. So her life is not my life. What she has experienced is horrors beyond what I'll ever know. And without sharing too many details, growing up in South America, her family in poverty experienced sex trafficking. So what she has carried for most of her life is never my story. It's our story together. But it's just so interesting that the way the sector works is a kind of silos. There's so much overlap with domestic violence and mental health as well. Overlapping. Someone's going through turmoil and their mental health can be impacted, but the way the community kind of responds is often just one piece of the puzzle rather than this holistic view.
Continuing with that same theme, you mentioned that your 10-year-old brother at that time, in one way or another, of course, it affects him, but he had to kind of detach himself from there. What would today's Ali Kelly's message be to your 10-year-old brother? I'm sure in some shape or form was affected by what your mother was going through. And you dealt with it as a 6-year-old by crying with her. He dealt with it in a different way. What might be the message with, as you say, with the wisdom of today to your brother who was, I don't know, it doesn't need to be 10, he could be 12, 15 as you'll have grown older. What might be a message to a young person in that who is going through something like that, in that kind of young carer role, but also trying to preserve their sanity, preserve their normality?
It's so interesting. I've never been asked that either, but I think I'll just comment in my own story that I feel like a lot of my journey to be who I am today has been about finding a voice. Because when you live with someone whose needs are bigger than your own, it's like that need is what keeps coming first.
Right.
So I guess the advice that I would tell my young brother would be that, again, I kind of fall back on empathy in terms of understanding that he has needs too, and I think sometimes when you neglect your own needs, this low self-esteem pattern repeats. So we were both probably faced with that quiet, gone under the radar needs because we weren't shown any different, so different to who I am now. And interesting in terms of both our carer roles in this older adult phase. I'd say my brother's turned into this financial carer rather than the emotional one. That's the role he could play. We're both quite stable, so even though you live amongst that turmoil, we've found stability. And I think the reason we've come through it, not every family would have the opportunity of the gift that my mum passed on, meaning even though she's come through such turmoils, she actually believed in personal development. And she actually took both my brother and I through quite a lot of personal development. Like, I remember age 10, I think, we were learnt about goal setting and building a better life for ourselves. So despite what she was challenged with, she always wanted a better life for us. And even though suicide ideation presented, she never had self-harm during our lifespan. So there is this drive and strength, and because of her story, she's broken through from poverty and oppression and wanted to improve herself. So I think that's possibly made an impact on our life now.
Yeah. So to our listeners of the podcast, most of them are healthcare professionals or professionals in the social work space, or counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists. And we've come to a message that we might give to your then father, who's kind of mature defenses would have been, she will get through this. So he was giving a message of hope, but that message of hope had a sense of kind of denial about all of it as well. So we'll come to a message for your father. So as a psychiatrist, I don't tend to talk to young carers. I often will have interactions with adults who are in a caring role. We tend to get collateral information from we make relapse prevention plans, we make safety plans, we try to gain a sense of clarity around who's responsible for what, when, where, how. But we don't have too many interactions with the young carers, and often children's services will be expected to kind of support those young carers. So if there was a combined message from all that you have said so far that you would want to give to healthcare professionals in the social work arena who are interacting with people in suicidal distress, but also have interactions with children or adolescents, what would your advice be to them in terms of what should you share with them?
Great question. I think now, with my experience in working with community for many years, and the communities, like the youngest age cohorts that we tend to work with is 4-year-old children plus, is you'd be surprised how much these children know. So some of our programs going into primary school spaces, there's this resistance. Oh, full stop. There's resistance when you mention the word suicide prevention. Sometimes people just are taboo. They don't want to go anywhere near it. But if you have an ally that understands suicide prevention is an opportunity to build skills well before a suicide manifests or risks manifest, it becomes an opportunity to work on micro social skills down the ladder. But what I'm trying to say is what we're hearing echoed from the children's voices is that they're ready for that chat, because you've got 8-year-old, 10-year-old children seeing their peers taking their lives. And you think what you want to do is protect them and hide them, and let's not talk about suicide because, there's all this fear. Will the children understand it? Is it too complex for them to understand? Will it cause more self-harm and more suicide attempts? There's all these stigmas around it. But in communities on repeat, we have heard these primary school age children wanting to have the conversation because they want to understand. So we're seeing patterns where what we used to see mental distress popping up in high schoolers, so teenagers, 13, 14, that type of mental distress is already happening in the primary school age. So that's my 2 cents to if there are people in the field that are not connecting with the children or the teenagers because they're trying to be protective, my thoughts would be to actually challenge that thinking. You can absolutely advocate for suicide prevention in safe ways where it doesn't have to be a risk to these children or young people. And if anything, there's a level of gratitude. Just like how if there's someone who has suicide intervention today in front of me, I would be direct and ask that question, are you currently suicidal? And sometimes that's a relief. Someone in my network has finally asked me, this level of being too protective is not needed. The way that Mind Blank's been able to bring about suicide prevention initiatives with these younger years is through storytelling. And part of our safe practice, it's capturing stories of lived experience that we actually wrap our lessons around with humor. Now, that's going to sound strange because who wants the topic of depression and humor? It's this conflict of, do you really want to be laughing about something so serious? Well, my response is, we've found a way to educate people where humor is used lightly just as a way to create safety. Because when we have safety, we have an opportunity where barriers, we can break down the barriers. And when we break down the barriers, we can have safe conversations with people who actually want to know more knowledge in some of these taboo subjects. And we can create the safety in understanding the pathways to understand all the different avenues that we can take for early intervention. Because if we're seeing it in community, you're going to be in a position where you're going to want to know what to do. So even some of those safety talks, even the kids need to know, because they'll often be vicariously taking on some of those extreme emotions, and they too will need, skills. And of course, if you've got child and adolescent counselors supporting them, that's great. But the health system that we have, it's broken. It's illness focus. It waits for us to get sick, and then these budgets kick in. And when the budgets kick in, it looks at us as an individual. And the avenue for wellness, prevention, resilience, well-being, I honestly believe is a holistic picture. What's that community doing around that individual? Not just put the onus on the individual who is suffering to improve their mood. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So going back to the primary school year, so about a couple of things. I think on World Suicide Prevention Day 2022, the podcast that we did was actually on humor.
Great.
So I'm absolutely kind of in agreement with you that sometimes the way to have these really challenging, courageous conversations, for that you need psychological safety, and laughter and humor is a brilliant way to kind of create that. So well done on being able to bring that into those primary school years. A couple of years back, we delivered suicide prevention training across 18 schools in Hong Kong. And one of the things we found was that the kind of completely unenviable jobs of principals and heads of years who are worrying about the contagion effect of someone who has self-harmed or has made threats to self-harm or has made an attempt in a school. So the needs of the school community versus the needs of the individual. And it's a very difficult balancing act for them. And this is, I'm talking about the secondary school years. But if the foundation was laid, as he was saying, in primary school years, around almost a scaffolding of skills through which people can converse and articulate suicidal distress, then perhaps that contagion effect can be contained in a meaningful way. But we are perhaps really worried about the contagion effect in young people because they haven't got the understanding. So this seems like a good segue to get into Mind Blank's approach, and you'll use forum theatre. Could you
Yeah.
explain this to me as a 5-year-old? Okay,
Ah.
treat me as a 5-year-old and explain to me what is forum theatre.
Yeah, right. We like to tell stories. Yeah, and the stories that we tell, they don't always end well, but we do have a chance to go back through the stories. And so with Mind Blank, we hire professional actors. And often, this is me talking to an older version, but often these professional actors are also mental health first aid trained, suicide prevention trained, so they're arts and health background. But once a story ends, the actors get to go back through the storyline again. So it's an empowerment model in terms of we get to encourage voice and we get to use a forum discussion to go back and reflect on what are the different choices that person had in their life. The forum theatre model specifically follows the one character being the main character and what's in their control, right? So what we're trying to capture is all the different points for early intervention options, if that makes sense to you.
Yep.
And
this.
Sorry,
I was going to say. So we run. So this is something that we run with people who are suicidal, helping them do their safety planning. We will have a character, and we will have the characters. Then we do it in a group setting, run through their day, and then something good happens or something bad happens. We don't know where the outcome is, and then we work with a group of people, creating almost the optimum safety plan for this person. And in the process of safety planning, the person who is in suicidal distress also gains insight about their own well-being and their own safety. It almost sounds very similar, but of course with a preventative approach, with children in schools having that kind of understanding through the learning through those various iterations of that story. And this would have gone down that particular track if this would have opened up this exit and that would have opened up that exit. Yeah, very interesting.
So to help you explain how we fit the suicide prevention model is we would often partner with a health service, because when we raise awareness, we're very aware that our program, sometimes we encourage help seeking as the next contact point, and we want to reduce the amount of time that person asks for help and actually gets the help. So it's actually going to be counterproductive if we're telling all these children, seek help, if we don't have that, what's the call to action? So we often partner with health service providers that can offer intervention support. Sometimes that's one-to-one support, sometimes that's family support or different services in community. We try to focus on early intervention skill building that's focusing on prevention and early intervention and not just the crisis end. Because what we know about the crisis end is like staging a suicide, for example. There's some risks to that. We are not here to trigger the young people. We work in partnership with the health sector. So our lived experience stories are quite, how do you say it? We work together for safety. But it's quite early intervention. So I'll just talk you through an example of one of the storylines that does touch on suicide. Is it starts with a young fella, the main character. You've got a second marriage in the family, so they're dealing with change. You've got a relocation into a different state, territory. They're moving house, so they're needing to make new peers. And in this transition of change, they've never had to make friends before, because when you grow up in the same town, same community, you inherit the people you grow up with. And sometimes this is what we know about loneliness, right, is isolation. And if they don't get their foot in the door with some peer connections, it can lead to that negative self-talk spiral. The depression starts to manifest where their grades are dropping, but in that family cohort, their parents do not see it. The parents are busy. If you've just moved into state, you've got a new marriage, you've got new children, all sorts of things happening. The school picks up on this child who's not settling in. But unfortunately, that teacher may not have the skills to actually pick up the depression that's there, which then kind of leads to negative behavior spiraling, get kicked out of school, poor choices in friendship groups, drug and alcohol, which leads to a consequence of suicide ideation. So with a chance to go back and intervene, we get a chance to build skills, starting with that peer connection. How do you make a friend? We all know how to make friends, but just encouraging.
Do we though? Like honestly,
great question.
It's given the stats of loneliness that we talked about,
right?
And it's amazing. Some of the interventions that people are advising is how to start a conversation.
Yes.
Like as a community, as a society, we have lost the ability to initiate a conversation, to tell someone else how was your day. So I'm sure these skills that you're building around how to create friendships, I think are really important skills in terms of mental wellness. And because, sorry, I interrupted you there, but yeah.
No, but I agree with you. And it's so true. Thanks for that reminder. Yeah, we are living in a lonely world and a tech addicted world, so needing to create real relationships, it's a hit or miss. We get a chance to then introduce the concept of negative self-talk, because that's the spiraling attitude that we start to see as a first warning sign. We get to go back through the storyline, and you've got a teacher who is an ally that misses the opportunity to talk to that child about their well-being properly. So being able to replay that scene, we get a chance to ask the kids, and remind them, us adults, we get it wrong all the time. What advice do you have to an adult to help them connect with you? We try and plant that seed to help them understand, hey, you know what? The first person you seek help with may not be that helpful. So where else can you go? Because we too often see these teenagers build up all their courage to ask that one adult, for help that may or may not go well. And if it doesn't go well, that's it. I'm zipping my lips and I'm never going to talk to anyone ever again, and I'll do this all on my own. So we encourage them to have a broader perspective on help seeking and brainstorm at least 5 options. What are the options for supporting community? What are the options within the school setting? What are the peers, the family groups you can connect with? We find in schools there's a general awareness now about depression or mental health, so we know what we're supposed to do, but we see with the kids all the time, even though they know they're supposed to talk to an adult or they know that the kids helpline is there, they don't know what to do next. It's kind of like, are you okay? We know we can ask, are you okay? But are we really skilled to know how to handle the conversation next? So there's this translation of helping them understand, what are some words you can use? Because sometimes people are experiencing mental distress but don't have the language to trigger that key word. So you're going in to see a clinical practitioner, you've got, your 10-minute interview or in the initial cycle. If you don't say specific words or tell them what's going on, you may not get the result you want or need, So that scene helps us debrief the help-seeking pathway. Then you have a chance to connect with the family situation, because in the child's story, the family dialogue ends up getting them kicked out of home. So they're a little bit older in this time frame. But the skill that we're building is conflict resolution It's a skill anyone could deal with, because we try and teach that insight. If you argue with someone and you just argue back, how helpful is that? You know, you're putting wood on that fire and it's getting bigger. So the conflict resolution in that household, we have to teach them these minor steps to break down the processes. There's this silly argument over a tomato sauce bottle. So the parent's angry about cleaning, and, what can you do to diffuse that so you don't have to have that negative emotion spiral? So it's simple things like apologize, clean up after yourself, but we try and, in that platform, give the children an opportunity to build their own independent thinking and create their own suggestions of what they can do. Because sometimes they'll say, I know, the student can just go home and clean up the whole house before their whole parents notice, The reality check is, how many teenagers would do that? Is that realistic? Yes, you avoid one conversation today. What happens tomorrow when you forget? But the point being, is that really what's going on? And we try and challenge them, because what has that kid not said to their parent? Us adults cannot read your mind. If the parent hasn't noticed that kid's struggling, you got to tell them. So we try and have an actual intervention where the kids find the safety in a space where they can word, what, I'm not doing okay, Mum. I'm not fitting in at school, or, what is actually bothering them. So it's just it's a nice way to help build skills. And if you've noticed, all these interventions, we haven't directly talked about suicide.
Yeah, but you don't need to. You are building that resilience. But we call this scenario planning. So in clinical terms, we essentially, what you have just laid out in front of me is a whole bunch of what we call what if scenarios, right? What if this happens? What if that happens? And you have provided the person a whole branch of different avenues that they can take. And through the power of forum theatre, it seems you are engaging them in what we call guided discovery. They are coming across different, different eventualities, different consequences that might come of taking a particular path. So what if scenarios, if then scenarios, if this happens, then what will be, you're thinking through simple but very effective ways to navigate what life will throw to these young people. And I love the fact that, you're highlighting things like the first person that you speak to may not be the most helpful person, like if someone doesn't tell that to you, it is so easy for someone who has got that negative triad of, negative view of the self, the world, and the future, to jump to conclusions that there is no help available. No one cares. No one can be bothered about me. So just even that, I think, can change the lens through which the young person views the world and views help seeking. It's remarkable. There's congratulations on the work that you guys are doing. It's no wonder you all have been winning awards all over the place. So,
thank you.
But I understand you all are diversifying into the workplaces as well, and you all are doing a lot of work there. Would you want to share a little bit of how you all would approach things in a workplace?
Yeah, I do. And I also just want to quickly talk about the evidence behind the model, because I'm not just talking the talk. There's some great evidence backing it. But let's just quickly share, in terms of the workplace mental health focus, us adults have a lot of work to do as well. And, if we're trying to get these kids to be proactive about, help seeking is tough. Actually, the adults are worse at it, because we know what these warning signs are. We know we're taking on too much, and, we do it anyway. And sometimes we're the most resistant to change. So, we actually use a very similar model in terms of this forum practice, telling stories of lived experience and hosting forum discussions in workplace mental health psychosocial risks.
So if you were to go in today's Ali Kelly, going in today into a workplace where the 6-year-old Ali Kelly's father was there, and you were having a conversation over lunch break where the 6-year-old Ali Kelly's father says, my wife's really been struggling with depression, but she gets depressed every now and then and things get better. What will today's Ali Kelly, with her wisdom, share with the 6-year-old Ali Kelly's father? And she's just come in, into their workplace, talking about mental health. You've had the morning doing forum theatre. What might you share with Ali Kelly's father?
Yeah, great question. I love it. I think what I would provoke is I'd just congratulate him on, well done, this is the first step because you've identified the signs are there, Just like mental health first aid provides the ALGE framework. Just if anyone doesn't know about the mental health first aid, it's similar to actual first aid. First aid has a Dr. RBC, mental health first aid has ALGE, which is all about, spot the signs, intervene and refer. And Mind Blank programs actually complement the mental health first aid program because we're able to work with a workplace, tailor it to their need, and then put it back into action within that context. So a psychosocial hazard, and I have had this before, where a workplace post-COVID was concerned. A lot of their staff are office staff dealing with a membership-based business, and mental distress is popping up in a phone call, and suicide ideation pops up. And this staff member is overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. And the workplace hasn't equipped the workers with mental health policies or pathways to know how to guide that conversation safely. So I just wanted to explain that we're able to tailor context according to what needs we see and then paint a picture as to what are some safe pathways. So if that person would have gone through our workshop, they would have hopefully had seen some of the avenues of intervention and frameworks for help support. And I would say that if they've come to us with that discussion, they've come to us with the first step, which is spotting the signs. I would encourage them to find a voice to share their concern. And obviously the next step is that referral. So quite often people who are unskilled in mental health literacy may not know how comforting it is to be really direct and just ask that question to a loved one, are you suicidal? Which I don't think he had been able to do previously. And if that response is yes, then encouraging referral. So I'm an advocate for prevention and early intervention, but the first time my mum actually got support from a trauma counsellor was in her 60s. So that's quite late. The second thing I would say is if he does not feel confident to be able to take those steps, the steps being spot the signs, share concern, and then referral, I would advocate that who else does he have in his network who may be a champion and an ally who he can lean on to help support that transition pathway? Because too often, I think individuals feel overwhelmed or they feel like they have to do it all. But actually, it could be as simple as if you are being that intervene or first response and you don't feel confident asking those direct questions, you can call someone like Lifeline and put them on the phone when you're there together, expressing, I feel a little bit overwhelmed. I'm not sure what to do. This is a different pathway. Can we try it? And that can actually put them in contact with a health professional that could then triage, well, if they see suicide ideation, acting on getting support if needed. So yeah, that's my advice or support team.
Yeah. So just a reminder to our listeners that in the app that we have recently launched, Safe Life Guide, we are putting in country-specific emergency lines and crisis lines, and we are populating them based on personal recommendations. Please send in if you have had a good experience with a particular line, whether that be the Lifeline in your country, the Lifeline equivalent in your country. Please send it in to admin@progress.guide. Also, you can kind of text us as well through the podcast itself. So, Ali, I can't imagine. We're almost been chatting for an hour. How kind of time flies by. And I love the work that you're doing because it is experiential. It's not someone sitting in a lecture, just listening to someone talk about it. You're using narratives, stories. Stories are data with a soul, and it's such a beautiful way to get people engaged because you can share lots of evidence, lots of data, and what to do, what not to do. People forget all of that, but people remember the stories because stories evoke emotions and feelings. People rarely, I run 5-day suicide prevention workshops. By the Saturday, they've forgotten 80% of what I've said. Like that's the feeling that I get. So we spend a lot of time on repetition, like registration, retention, recall, over and over and over again, because we're talking about some very nuanced skills. But if you can create a story, then people remember the context in which to use the skills. And I love the fact that you are using stories. It's iterative. People can get involved in the story. And that provides them skills and the confidence to ask questions like, have you got thoughts to end your life? And you and I working in this field could go blue in the face to say, it's okay to ask the question. You're not planting any ideas in their head. They already most likely have thought about it. It's a relief for them to be able to speak to this. But it's very difficult for people who haven't worked in the mental health field to actually feel comfortable asking that question because there's so many doubts that they have from one extent of kind of, is that rude, is that intrusive, to the other around planting ideas into people's heads, or to the extent that am I going to uncover something that I cannot then put back in? Am I opening up a Pandora's box? Is it better not to go down that path? So really glad that you're bringing it to life through individual narratives and stories. I'm sure the teams that you're working with, the schools that you've been to, the workplaces you all have been to, and I've seen so many pictures of people actually laughing, right? And so clearly you're being able to create that psychological safety. And like we talk about safety and safeness, like safety is protection, but safeness is almost the opposite. It's independence and it's freedom. It's the ability to explore and find out more, kind of engage with another person with curiosity, which is kind of what you all are creating through vicarious learning through these narratives and stories, which is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Is there a particular message that you would like to end on? I know we kind of talked about a message to the 6-year-old Ali, a message to the 10-year-old brother, a message to the father, is there a message that you would want to give to all our listeners? Most of them are working in mental health or social care and in the suicide prevention space. Is there a particular message that you would want to end on?
Yeah, I think I'm going to loop it back to the case of evidence we have here. Because if I was a health practitioner right now, my message to them would be to watch this space because there's an emerging arts and health space popping up. I just finished my thesis on theatre interventions for mental health and suicidality outcomes. Right. So I was really curious what's out there in the world that is using a theatre-based intervention in this way and how are they measuring it? So our systematic literature review picked up 26 studies initially. Now that was in 2021. And I'll tell you now, none of the studies are from Australia, which is disappointing. However, we're just redoing the searches because since 2021, time has now passed, COVID has happened, and another 30 studies have popped up. So this is an emerging space. The concept of using narrative, story, role play is actually very common in the healthcare system. there's a lot of medical role play. So to teach students, like nursing students, how to pick up signs of mental distress, or there's quite a lot of health promotion that uses forum theatre as a style. I'm not the only one coming up with it, you know. We're just the first organisation here in Australia applying it in this mental health literacy space, you know. Art therapies generally have been around for a long time, and they work really well with at-risk background children and young people. So the case of evidence has been there for a long time. I think one of the reasons why health has underutilized it is because health tends to be that illness model which is clinically driven. So not all the arts-based models will have the evidence of scientific research backing it, but there's an emerging space now that the two worlds are now talking to each other that's growing. My wish, or what I would love to see, is even like art therapies are illness-based models, because it waits for people to get sick and then we'll intervene. So I would like to see a world where we're using arts for wellness, where we're advocating these prevention skill building based techniques before people and community actually need it. And part of that vision is offering services. If you're going to be working in the best early intervention angle, it's the children, it's the wraparound education with the teachers, it's the wraparound education with the parents, and it's shifting into medium to long-term planning. This come in, one-off, do a speech in your workplace for Mental Health Month, or do a one program in a school once and then walk away. It's short-term. And what we need to be seeing is planning for prevention. So if you are willing to invest in wellness, then you'll have a long-term strategy. You know that this one-off model is not going to work, so you're going to need to plan a minimum of 3 years to invest in the skill building to see real change in community. And I feel really blessed that the opportunity that Mindblank has given us, like just one example of a community that we've worked in, we've been successful in receiving funding in the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community groups around the Northern Territory. And there's one community that is provoking the thought of what does 7 years look like. And I highly commend that. They do not want this one-off model that comes in and comes out and that's it. They want consistency, and they're ready for consistency, and they're ready to invest. And invest means embed community planning. We're already making like box breathing techniques for emotional regulation trendy in community with the children, you know. Right. And story works so well, you know, but they're helping us understand what we need to do to turn some of those stories into Dreamtime stories. So it's becoming the train the trainer. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's becoming the train the trainer model, where it's community ownership, and that's what I would like to see in all the communities, whether it's even a workplace doing a one-off Are You Okay cupcake celebration's not going to cut it. You mentioned before, if people are awkward about not having the confidence to speak directly about a taboo subject, we need to normalize it. And part of that is exposure, and part of that is prevention planning is a long-term gain. So it's re-educating to make a real difference. Yeah. We need to stop being so busy in this treadmill model of like continuing to do Band-Aids, and we got to start planning for longer-term visions and collaborations.
I asked Ali for one message, and God knows how many messages were there in that last final spiel. Let me try and see if I have captured all of them. The first is, you know, it's an emerging field. Watch the evidence space and watch this space in which kind of Ali's own thesis would be coming out. And it sounds like this is where art is going to meet science. And it's a beautiful way in which you can reach out. Training that is interactive, it's iterative, it encourages reflection, it encourages learning, encourages soul searching. and it's beautiful the way it's coming along, and the work that you all have done in the Indigenous space is also remarkable. I was reading somewhere about 60% of the communities that you'll have gone into have got, there's a large Indigenous group in which you all are doing your work as well. So, and creating this community ownership and not just in for a kind of a talk and that's the end of it, but creating long-term plans, embedding these skills and creating models through which they can transcend those cultural barriers, taking these stories and turning them into Dreamtime stories. That's just beautiful. Ali, it has been a wonderful hour, and the hour has just whizzed by. And thank you so much for the courage that it takes to do this work and for sharing your story so graciously so that we can all learn from your story. And the work that you and Mind Blank have been doing in this space is really inspiring. And we would love to kind of hear about the work in Northern Territory, maybe a year down the line as to how you guys are going and what further learnings you all have had to share with listeners of the Protect podcast. Thank you so much for being so gracious in sharing all your wisdom and knowledge. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you so much.